Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. In this week's box office roundup video for the weekend that ended on December 15th, 2024, two new movies made it into this weekend's top 5 movies at the domestic box office, but both of them flopped. And the cumulative total earnings for this weekend's top 5 movies at the domestic box office fell to $72.5 million, which was a 37.81% decrease from last weekend's cumulative total of $116.6 million. But after 3 consecutive weekends of the domestic cumulative total being greater than $100 million, this weekend's cumulative total was unable to achieve that. But before proceeding, I'd like to ask everyone to please like this video, please leave a comment, please subscribe to support this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. Thanks! So this weekend's top 5 movies at the domestic box office included the following. Clinging to number 1 was Walt Disney Animation Studios' sequel entitled Moana 2. Clinging to number 2 was Universal Pictures and Mark Platt Productions' musical fantasy entitled Wicked, starring Cynthia Erivo, Ariana Grande, Jeff Goldblum, and Michelle Yeoh. Opening at number 3 was Columbia Pictures, Sony Pictures, Marvel Entertainment's, and 2 other studios' supervillain movie entitled Kraven the Hunter. Falling to number 4 was Paramount Pictures, Scott Free Films, Lucy Fisher's, and Douglas Wick's historical drama Gladiator II, starring Paul Mescal, Denzel Washington, and Pedro Pascal. And opening at number 5 was New Line Cinema's, Warner Bros. Animation's, Sola Media's, Wingnut Films, and Domain Entertainment's animated fantasy entitled The Lord of the Rings: The War of the Rohirrim. Domestically, Moana 2 earned another $26.6 million during the weekend and $11.6 million during the week to bring its current domestic box office total up to $337.5 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $79.5 million to bring its current international box office total up to $379.5 million. So globally, the movie earned another $117.7 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $717 million, which makes Moana 2 the 4th highest grossing movie worldwide for 2024 by surpassing the $714.4 million earned by Dune Part 2. Domestically, Wicked earned another $22.5 million during the weekend and $14.4 million during the week to bring its current domestic box office total up to $359 million, which brings it to within $2 million of the $361 million that was earned by Despicable Me 4, which is currently the 3rd highest grossing movie domestically for 2024. Thus, by next weekend, Wicked will become the 3rd highest grossing movie domestically for 2024. Internationally, the movie earned another $30.9 million to bring its current international box office total up to $165.9 million. So globally, the movie earned another $67.8 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $525 million. Kraven the Hunter opened by earning $11 million domestically and $15 million internationally for a global gross opening weekend box office total of $26 million. And that $11 million is the worst domestic opening weekend box office for all of Sony's Marvel movies, which was an achievement formerly held by Madam Web, which had earned $15.3 million during its domestic opening weekend earlier this year. So it's just as well that Sony recently decided to not make any more Spider-Man spin-off movies, such as this one, Madam Web, and 2022's Morbius, all of which flopped in theaters. Domestically, Gladiator II earned another $7.8 million during the weekend and $5.3 million during the week to bring its current domestic box office total up to $145.9 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $16.9 million to bring its current international box office total up to $252.6 million. So globally, the movie earned another $30 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $398.5 million. The Lord of the Rings: The War of the Rohirrim opened by earning $4.6 million domestically and $5.7 million internationally for a global gross opening weekend box office total of $10.3 million. And as of this weekend, the three highest grossing movies, both domestically and worldwide, for 2024 remained Disney Pixar's animated movie Inside Out 2, Disney and Marvel Studios' MCU movie Deadpool and Wolverine, and Illumination Entertainment's animated sequel Despicable Me 4. Domestically, all three of these movies have ended their theatrical runs, so their final domestic box office earnings remain at $653 million, $636.7 million, and $361 million respectively, and all three remain the highest grossing movies domestically so far this year. So Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine are the only two movies so far this year that have broken $600 million domestically. Further, Deadpool and Wolverine became the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time domestically. But internationally, each of these three movies are continuing to earn additional revenue. For Inside Out 2, the movie earned another $41,000 internationally, which made no appreciable change in its current international box office total of $1,045.6 million. So the movie's current global gross box office total increased by the same amount to $1,698.5 million, and it remains the first and only movie so far this year to break $1.6 billion worldwide. Further, Inside Out 2 has now earned $252.9 million more than last year's highest grossing movie, Barbie, which earned $1,445.6 million. For Deadpool and Wolverine, the movie earned another $2,000 internationally, which also made no appreciable change in its current international box office total of $701.3 million. So the movie's current global gross box office total remained the same at $1,338.1 million. So Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine remain the only movies so far this year to have broken $1 billion globally, while Deadpool and Wolverine remains the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time. In terms of the MCU, Deadpool and Wolverine became the franchise's sixth highest grossing movie worldwide of all time by outperforming the $1,336.5 million that was earned in 2018 by the movie Black Panther. It's also the first MCU movie since 2021's Spider-Man No Way Home to break $1 billion at the global box office. For Despicable Me 4, the movie earned another $148,000 to bring its current international box office total up to $608.3 million. So the movie's current global gross box office total rose by the same amount to $969.3 million. And it remains only the third movie so far this year to have broken $900 million globally. The reported production budgets for Inside Out 2, Deadpool and Wolverine, and Despicable Me 4 are $200 million, $250 million, and $100 million respectively. And to estimate what their break-even point ranges might be, I'll multiply each movie's production budget by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget. And when I do that, we get the following estimated break-even point ranges. For Inside Out 2, we get an estimated break-even point range of $500 million to $600 million. For Deadpool and Wolverine, we get an estimated break-even point range of $625 million to $750 million. And for Despicable Me 4, we get an estimated break-even point range of $250 million to $300 million. Thus, all three of these movies have made bank. I'm also tracking several other movies that are no longer in or never were in the top 5, which includes the following. Falling to number 6 was 7 Bucks Productions, Chris Morgan Productions, Detective Agencies, Amazon MGM Studios, and MGM Pictures' very high-budgeted Christmas action movie entitled Red One, starring Dwayne Johnson, Chris Evans, and Lucy Liu. Falling to number 7 was Syncopy's and Lynda Obst Productions' re-released 2014 movie Interstellar. Falling to number 11 was A24's Strong Babies and American Light and Fixture's comedy entitled Y2K, which stars that cinematic kiss of death, Rachel Zegler. Clinging to number 14 was Columbia Pictures, Marvel Entertainment's, and several other companies' Marvel threequel entitled Venom: The Last Dance. And rising to number 21 was Universal Pictures and DreamWorks Animation's movie entitled The Wild Robot. Domestically, Red One earned another $4.4 million during the weekend and $2.4 million during the week to bring its current domestic box office total up to $92.6 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $4.4 million to bring its current international box office total up to $82.6 million. So globally, the movie earned another $11.2 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $175.2 million. Domestically, the re-released Interstellar earned another $3.3 million domestically from a total of 321 movie theaters, which was nearly double as compared with last week, to raise its current domestic box office total up to $199.8 million. But its per-theater average earnings dropped to $10,327, which is still well above any of the average earnings per theater for the top 5 domestic movies. The movie didn't earn any more money internationally, but its global gross box office total rose to $640.7 million. Domestically, Y2K earned another $685,000 to bring its current domestic box office total up to $3.8 million, but it still hasn't earned anything internationally yet. Its average earnings per the 1,948 movie theaters that it is still playing at was a pitiful $352. Thus, the 10-year-old movie Interstellar earned 4.8 times as much money overall and 29.3 times as much money per theater from 83.5% fewer theaters as compared with Y2K. And yes, with its reported $15 million production budget, Y2K is a flop. This is but one example of the adverse consequences that any movie will likely suffer, due to including Rachel Zegler and her very toxic public persona, which is also part of the reason why the newest trailer for Disney's upcoming 2025 movie Snow White, which stars the actress, is heavily ratioed, as I had talked about in a video that I had released on December 7th, and which I highly recommend. Domestically, Venom: The Last Dance earned another $235,000 to bring its current domestic box office total up to $139.5 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $2.3 million to bring its current international box office total up to $336 million. So globally, the movie earned another $2.7 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $475.5 million. Domestically, The Wild Robot earned another $81,000 to bring its current domestic box office total up to $143 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $888,000 to bring its current international box office total up to $180.1 million. So globally, the movie earned another $1 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $323.1 million. Now, to know whether these movies are going to break even or not, as well as how much money they might be losing, we need to estimate their break-even points. When a movie's marketing budget is known, we can add it to the movie's production budget and then multiply the sum by 2. Otherwise, we can multiply the production budget by 2.5 for a single mid-range estimated break-even point, or by both 2.5 and 3.0 for a broader estimated break-even point range. Both methods account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves. For Moana 2, with its reported production budget of around $150 million, as reported by Screen Rant, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $375 million to $450 million. For Wicked, with its reported production budget of around $150 million, as reported by Screen Rant, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $375 million to $450 million. For Kraven the Hunter, with its reported production budget of $110 million, according to Variety, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $275 million to $330 million. For Gladiator II, with its reported very high production budget of $250 million, as reported by Variety, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $625 million to $750 million. For The Lord of the Rings: The War of the Rohirrim, with its reported production budget of $30 million, as reported by Slash Film, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $75 million to $90 million. For Red One, with its reported very high production budget of $250 million, as reported by Variety, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $625 million to $750 million. For Venom: The Last Dance, with its production budget of $120 million, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $300 million to $360 million. For The Wild Robot, with its production budget of $78 million, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $195 million to $234 million. So in this video, I am no longer projecting or never have projected what the final domestic or global gross box office earnings might be for the movies Red 1, Venom the Last Dance, or The Wild Robot, because their expected future earnings are either currently too small, possibly non-existent, or going unreported, or their projected earnings aren't much higher than their current earnings. For Red 1, which is starting to be streamed, with its reported global gross box office earnings of $175.2 million and its estimated break-even point range of $625 million to $750 million, the movie currently stands to lose somewhere on the order of $449.8 million to $574.8 million in global gross box office revenue. But both Venom the Last Dance and The Wild Robot have already made bank. Then by dividing the losses in global gross box office revenue by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, the affected studios currently stand to lose the following. For Red 1, 7 Bucks Productions, Chris Morgan Productions, Detective Agency, Amazon, MGM Studios, and MGM Pictures currently stand to lose somewhere on the order of $224.9 million to $287.4 million. So Red 1 could potentially become the biggest flop for 2024, since its current projected losses are on par with those of this year's current biggest flop, Argyle, whose losses range from $201.9 million to $251.9 million based on my own calculations. And that now brings us to the movies whose final domestic and global gross box office revenues I am currently projecting, which includes Moana 2, Wicked, Kraven the Hunter, Gladiator II, and The Lord of the Rings: The War of the Rohirrim. For Moana 2, using a range of possible average weekly draws from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for the movie may range from $394.8 million at the low end, $408.3 million at the mid-range, and $426.2 million at the upper end, which is lower than last week's projection. But Moana 2 will be able to outperform Despicable Me 4 domestically, but possibly not the movie Wicked. Then by using the movie's current domestic share of 47.07%, which is lower than last week, I can project that the final global gross box office earnings for the movie may range from $838.7 million at the low end, $867.5 million at the mid-range, and $905.4 million at the upper end, which is more narrow than last week's projection. So Moana 2 won't be able to break $1 billion globally, and now it's also far less likely that it will be able to break $900 million, so it doesn't currently have the potential to outperform any of this year's 3 current highest grossing movies globally, but it has made bank. For Wicked, using a range of possible average weekly draws from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for the movie may range from $414.4 million at the low end, $427.5 million at the mid-range, and $444.6 million at the upper end, which is more narrow than last week's projection. Wicked will definitely outperform Despicable Me 4 to become the third highest grossing movie domestically, and the small lead that it has maintained over Moana 2 domestically will likely carry through to the end of both of their theatrical runs. Then by using the movie's current domestic share of 68.39%, which is lower than last week, I can project that the final global gross box office earnings for the movie may range from $605.9 million at the low end, $625 million at the mid-range, and $650.1 million at the upper end, which is slightly higher than last week's projection. So while Wicked is continuing to outperform Moana 2 domestically, it won't be able to catch up to Moana 2's global gross box office earnings, since Moana 2 is earning a lot more money internationally than Wicked, which is why Moana 2's domestic share is also so much lower than Wicked's by 20%. But Wicked has already made bank. For Kraven the Hunter, this is Sony's and Columbia Pictures' 18th Marvel movie, which all began with their 1997 Marvel movie entitled Men in Black. So excluding Venom the Last Dance, which is still playing in theaters, using the first 16 movies' combined average weekly drop of 34.19% with a standard deviation of 9.76%, that creates a range of possible average weekly draws for this movie from 24.44% to 43.95%. And using that range, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for the movie may range from $25 million at the low end, $32.2 million at the mid-range, and $44.7 million at the upper end. And if you are noticing the green dashed line towards the top of the chart, that represents the $43.8 million in final domestic box office earnings that the movie Madam Web earned earlier this year. So Kraven the Hunter, which now has the lowest domestic opening weekend box office earnings for all of Sony's Marvel movies, is very likely going to end up having the lowest final domestic box office earnings as well, which is an achievement currently held by Madam Web. Then by using the movie's current domestic share of 42.31%, I can project that the final global gross box office earnings for the movie may range from $59.2 million at the low end, $76 million at the mid-range, and $105.7 million at the upper end. And again, given that the final global gross box office earnings for Madam Web was $100.3 million, as shown by the green dashed line in the chart, it's very likely that Kraven the Hunter will become the lowest grossing Sony Marvel movie worldwide of all time, because it's very doubtful that the movie will break $100 million globally, and Madam Web is the current lowest grossing Sony Marvel movie worldwide. So with the movie's estimated break-even point range of $275 million to $330 million, Kraven the Hunter is a bona fide flop, as it currently stands to lose somewhere on the order of $169.3 million to $270.8 million in global gross box office revenue, which when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that Columbia Pictures, Sony Pictures, Marvel Entertainment, and 2 other studios currently stand to lose around $84.7 million to $135.4 million. For Gladiator II, using a range of possible average weekly drops from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for the movie may range from $165.5 million at the low end, $170.1 million at the mid-range, and $176.2 million at the upper end, which is more narrow than last week's projection. Then by using the movie's current domestic share of 36.62%, which is barely higher than last week's, I can project that the final global gross box office earnings for the movie may range from $452 million at the low end, $464.7 million at the mid-range, and $481.2 million at the upper end, which is lower than last week's projection. And with the movie's estimated break-even point range of $625 million to $750 million, Gladiator II is a bona fide flop, as it currently stands to lose somewhere on the order of $143.8 million to $298 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that Paramount Pictures, Scott Free Films, Lucy Fisher, and Douglas Wick currently stand to lose around $71.9 million to $149 million. And finally, for The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, using a range of possible average weekly draws from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for the movie may range from $11.5 million at the low end, $13.1 million at the mid-range, and $15.3 million at the upper end. Then by using the movie's current domestic share of 44.66%, I can project that the final global gross box office earnings for the movie may range from $25.7 million at the low end, $29.4 million at the mid-range, and $34.3 million at the upper end, which is nowhere near what the movie needs in order to break even. With the movie's estimated break-even point range of $75 million to $90 million, The Lord of the Rings: The War of the Rohirrim is a bona fide flop, as it currently stands to lose somewhere on the order of $40.7 million to $64.3 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that New Line Cinema, Warner Brothers Animation, Sola Media, Wingnut Films, and Domain Entertainment currently stand to lose around $20.4 million to $32.1 million. So as of this weekend, Kraven the Hunter and The Lord of the Rings: The War of the Rohirrim join Gladiator II and Red One as definite flops, while Venom: The Last Dance, The Wild Robot, Deadpool and Wolverine, Inside Out 2, Despicable Me 4, Moana 2, and Wicked have all made bank. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to each and every one of you who has subscribed to support this channel. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, and Blue Sky by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.